6 years ago, my sister stole my millionaire fiancé. At our mom's funeral, she flaunted her ring, man, and mansion, until I smiled and said, "Have you met my husband?" Her face turned pale when he walked over, because my husband was actually. Before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe. We truly need your love and support. And tell us in the comments, what's one life lesson everyone should hear before it's too late? Your words could make a difference. And also tell where are you watching from. You know, I almost wore the maid of honor dress I bought for your wedding. My sister Stephanie's voice cut through the quiet room, loud enough for everyone to hear. She looked me up and down, a nasty little smile on her lips. But then I remembered, that wedding never happened, did it? That was my sister. While I was standing here trying to find the strength to bury our mother, she was trying to bury me right alongside her. She wanted everyone to see her as the winner, the one who took my fiancé, my life, and my future, and she wanted me to stand here and cry about it. She wanted a show, and she was going to get one. For 6 long years, I let her believe she had broken me. When she stole Nathan, I fell apart. I ran away to a new city and let them live in the spotlight, showing off their perfect life while I was picking up the pieces of mine. Everyone here today remembered me as the girl who lost everything. They saw me standing here by myself and thought I was weak, that I was the same person I was back then. They saw Stephanie with her rich husband and her giant diamond ring and thought she had everything. But a life built on someone else's tears is as fragile as glass, and I could already see the cracks starting to form in hers. At least I gave him the life you couldn't, she pushed on, gesturing back to Nathan, who looked at the floor like a guilty child. What have you even been doing for the last 6 years, Rebecca? Hiding? I took a deep breath, feeling the familiar sting of her words. But this time, something was different. The pain was still there, like an old scar, but it didn't control me anymore. I looked her right in the eye, and for the first time in my life, I didn't look away. I saw the deep insecurity behind her cruel words, the desperate need to believe she had won, and I almost felt sorry for her. "I've been healing, Stephanie," I said, my voice quiet but steady, and the sound of it made her flinch. "I've been building a real life, not a stolen one. You should try it sometime." The shock on her face was better than any revenge I could have dreamed of. She was so used to me crumbling, so used to being able to push me down, that she didn't know how to handle it when I stood my ground. Her face turned red with anger, and she leaned in to deliver what she thought would be the final, crushing blow. "Building what?" she hissed. "A sad, lonely life? Look at you. You have no one. You came to our mother's funeral all alone." She spat that last word out, alone, thinking it was my greatest shame, the proof that she had won and I had lost. She threw it at me like a stone, expecting me to shatter. And as she said it, my eyes lifted from her angry face and looked toward the entrance of the funeral home. A slow smile spread across my face, because she had no idea what she had just done. She thought she was announcing my defeat to the entire room. But what she really did was set the stage for my victory, because the man who had just walked through the door was about to prove her wrong in the most spectacular way possible. 6 years ago, my life was something out of a magazine. I had a great job in marketing, an apartment I loved, and a mother who was my best friend in the whole world. Then I met Nathan Reynolds at a charity event. He was handsome, successful, and he looked at me like I was the only person in the room. Our romance was a whirlwind. One minute we were talking about our dreams over dinner, the next we were planning a future together. I had never been so happy, and I felt like my perfect life was finally complete. I thought nothing could ever go wrong. But every perfect story has a villain, and mine was my own sister. Stephanie had spent her entire life living in my shadow, and she hated me for it. I remember when I got a promotion, she accidentally spilled red wine on my favorite white dress right before the celebration dinner. She was always doing little things like that, small acts of war disguised as accidents. But I was so in love and so happy, I chose to ignore the warning signs. I thought her jealousy was just a part of her, something she would eventually outgrow. I believed that my happiness would be big enough for the both of us to share. My mother, Eleanor, saw things more clearly. One afternoon, while we were looking at wedding magazines, she took my hand and looked me straight in the eyes. "Be careful, honey," she told me, her voice gentle but serious. "Your sister looks at Nathan the same way she used to look at your favorite dolls right before she'd break them. Some people see happiness and just want to ruin it." She warned me that the brightest smiles can hide the sharpest teeth, but I didn't want to listen. I was floating on a cloud and didn't want anyone to bring me back down to earth, not even my own mother. A week later, Nathan took me out on a boat in the middle of the harbor. He got down on one knee with the most beautiful ring I had ever seen and asked me to be his wife. I screamed yes, crying happy tears as he spun me around. The first thing I did when we got back to shore was call Stephanie and ask her to be my maid of honor. I thought it would be a peace offering. I thought if I brought her into the center of my happiness, she would have no choice but to be happy for me too. It was the single biggest mistake of my life. From that moment on, a creeping unease began to settle over me. Stephanie was a little too excited, a little too helpful. I started noticing how she would touch Nathan's arm when she talked to him, or laugh a little too loudly at his jokes. I would find them talking in hushed tones, and they would stop the second I walked into the room. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told my mom that she was wrong, that we were all adults now and the childish games were over. I promised her everything was going to be perfect. And that was the biggest lie I ever told. In the final weeks before the wedding, the perfect life I had built began to crack. Nathan, the man who once admired my drive, started to pick me apart piece by piece. He would say things like, "Are you sure you should be working so late? A wife should be at home more," trying to make my ambition feel like a flaw. At the same time, Stephanie's calls became a daily poison. She'd say, "I'm only trying to help, but Nathan told me he thinks your wedding dress makes you look pale. Maybe you should reconsider." Every word was a carefully aimed arrow designed to make me doubt myself, to make me feel small and insecure in my own life. The final warning sign was a small, silver earring I found glinting on the floor of Nathan's car. I knew it instantly. It was from a pair I had given Stephanie for her birthday. When I confronted them, their story was too quick, too smooth. "Oh, that must have fallen out when she was helping me carry groceries yesterday," Nathan said with a nervous laugh. Stephanie just smiled that fake, sweet smile of hers. The lie was so perfectly rehearsed that it felt more like a confession. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I knew right then that my mother had been right all along. I was living in a house of lies, and it was about to come crashing down. 3 weeks before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, I decided to surprise Nathan at his office. I was carrying a bag with his favorite lunch, thinking maybe a small, normal moment could fix the growing distance between us. I pushed open the heavy wooden door to his office and the world stopped. It wasn't just a kiss. He had her pinned against his desk, his hands tangled in her hair, and she was wearing the emerald green dress she was supposed to wear as my maid of honor. The sight burned into my brain, a perfect, terrible picture of betrayal that would haunt my nightmares for years. The lunch bag dropped from my hand, scattering sandwiches and snacks across the expensive rug. Nathan jumped back, his face a mask of guilt as he started sputtering excuses that made no sense. But Stephanie, she didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. She slowly straightened her dress, a triumphant smirk on her face as she looked me right in the eye. "It's been going on for months, Rebecca," she said, her voice cold and steady. "He loves me now. You should just accept it." In that moment, the man I loved and the sister I grew up with were gone, replaced by two cruel strangers. I don't remember driving home. The next thing I knew, I was on the phone with my parents, the words, "The wedding is off," coming out of my mouth like they belonged to someone else. My mother's quiet, heartbroken support and my father's furious rage were just noise in the background of the buzzing in my head. I spent the next few days like a robot, calling caterers and florists, canceling the future I had been so excited to live. The silence in my apartment was the loudest sound I had ever heard, but it didn't last long. Soon, it was filled with the sound of my sister moving into the life that was supposed to be mine. The first 6 months after the betrayal were a walking nightmare. I lost my best client because I couldn't stop crying in the middle of our meetings. I became a ghost in my own city, haunted by the memory of his hand in mine on every street corner, at every restaurant we ever went to. I was drowning in the life we were supposed to have. In a moment of weakness, I called Stephanie one last time, hoping for something, anything, an apology, an explanation, a shred of remorse. But all I got was her cold, smug voice on the other end of the line. "He was never yours to lose, Rebecca," she said, before I could even speak. "Now stop calling. You're embarrassing yourself." That was the last time I ever heard her voice. I should have been angry, but I was too broken to feel anything but pain. The final blow came a month later. I was standing in line at the grocery store when I saw it, a society magazine with their faces plastered on the cover. "The city's newest power couple," the headline read. There they were, smiling at their courthouse wedding, her in a white dress, him looking down at her like she was his whole world. The same way he used to look at me. The magazine felt like a public announcement of my failure, a declaration to the whole city that I was nothing more than the woman they had left behind. That night, I hit the bottom. I sat alone in my dark apartment, the magazine open on the coffee table, a half-empty bottle of wine in my hand. I looked around at the life I was supposed to share with him, at the empty space where our future was supposed to be, and I felt a cold, crushing despair that almost swallowed me whole. This was it. This was what they had turned me into. A lonely, heartbroken woman drinking by herself in the dark. This was the pathetic picture they had painted of me, and for the first time, I saw myself through their eyes. And I finally got angry. It wasn't a loud, screaming anger. It was a cold, quiet fire that started deep inside me. It was the fire of a woman who had absolutely nothing left to lose. I stood up, poured the rest of the wine down the drain, and walked over to my computer. For hours, I sat there deleting every picture, every email, every single digital trace of them. I blocked their numbers. I blocked every mutual friend we ever had. It was a digital amputation, a painful but necessary surgery to cut the poison out of my life for good. I was erasing the weak, broken girl they had created. By sunrise, it was done. The old me was gone, deleted along with the thousands of pictures of a life that was never real. I looked at an old job offer I had ignored, a marketing director position in Chicago. It was a chance to escape, to start over where no one knew my name or my story. But as I packed my bags, I knew I wasn't just running away. I was running toward a fight. I packed 2 suitcases and left everything else behind. Chicago wasn't just a new city, it was a promise to myself that one day, I would be strong enough to face them again, and they would be the ones to feel ashamed. For the first year in Chicago, my life was just work. I buried myself in deadlines and marketing plans because it was easier than facing the crushing loneliness that waited for me every night in my empty apartment. My colleague Madison tried to drag me out, to get me to meet people, but the thought of dating, of trusting someone again, felt impossible. The scars from Nathan and Stephanie were still too raw, and I built a wall around my heart so thick I was sure no one would ever get through. I had accepted that my career would be my only love story from now on. Then, I went to a tech conference in San Francisco. I was only there to learn, but during one of the talks, I found myself listening to a man named Zachary Foster. He wasn't like Nathan, all flash and charm and big promises. He was quiet, intelligent, and everything he said was real and honest. He talked about building businesses with integrity, about treating people with respect. When I met him afterward, he looked at me with kind eyes and was genuinely interested in my ideas. For the first time in years, I felt seen for my mind, not just for what I could do for someone else. On our 3rd date, it happened. We were at a nice restaurant when I heard a man at the next table say to his date, "You're being too emotional, just calm down." It was the exact same thing Nathan had said to me 100 times, and it was like a switch flipped in my brain. The restaurant started spinning, I couldn't breathe, and the panic I had kept buried for so long came roaring to the surface. I was sure Zachary would run, that he would see me as broken and damaged goods. But instead, he just gently took my hand, guided me outside, and waited until I could finally breathe again. "I've been there," he said quietly, and then he told me about his own devastating heartbreak. And in that moment, I knew. This man wasn't going to hurt me. Our relationship grew slowly, built on a foundation of trust that I never thought I could have again. Months later, we were sitting on his couch, talking about our pasts. I was telling him about the tech world in Boston, and his face tensed up. I had one of the worst experiences of my career with a founder from Boston, he said, shaking his head. A real arrogant guy who was making reckless decisions. His ego was so big he ended up bankrupting his own company because he refused to listen to anyone. He let out a frustrated sigh, a ghost of an old anger on his face. I felt a strange sense of curiosity, a cold feeling creeping up my spine. I had to know. What was his name? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Zachary looked at me, a little confused by my intensity, but he answered anyway. His name was Nathan Reynolds. The world stopped. The air left my lungs. The man I was falling in love with, this good, kind, honorable man, was the same person who had unknowingly destroyed the man who almost destroyed me. I didn't laugh. I didn't even smile. I just felt a quiet click, like the last tumbler in a lock falling into place. My future was here, with him. And my past was finally, completely, powerless. Knowing that Zachary was the man who had brought Nathan's company down didn't make me want revenge. It just made me feel peaceful. It was like the universe had quietly balanced the scales for me while I was busy learning how to stand on my own 2 feet again. That secret knowledge gave me the final push I needed to let go of the anger. With that weight gone, everything in my life started to change. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was finally living. At work, I landed the biggest client my company had ever seen, and soon I was promoted to senior director. For the first time, I felt the pride of earning something for myself, not having it handed to me. My life outside of work started to fill up, too. I slowly let Madison and Zachary's wonderful sister, Caroline, into my life, and soon I had real friends for the first time since the betrayal. I even kept going to therapy, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to be whole. The nightmares of that day in Nathan's office finally started to fade. My love with Zachary grew stronger every day, not in big, flashy moments, but in the quiet, steady ones. It was in the way he'd make me coffee every morning, the way he'd listen patiently when I was upset, and the way he held my hand in the waiting room before my therapy sessions. He never tried to fix me, he just sat with me in the dark until I was ready to find the light again. 1 year after we met, on a sunny afternoon at the Chicago Botanic Garden, he asked me to marry him. There was no giant diamond this time, just a simple, elegant ring with a green emerald. For new beginnings, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And as I said yes, tears streamed down my face, but for the first time in a long time, they were tears of pure joy. Our wedding wasn't a huge, fancy affair like the one I had planned with Nathan. It was a small, intimate ceremony in a garden, surrounded by a handful of people who truly loved us. Seeing the genuine, tearful happiness on my parents' faces as I said my vows was a healing all on its own. My life was full. I had a husband I adored, a career I was proud of, and friends who had become my family. The ghosts of Nathan and Stephanie had become so small, so distant, they barely seemed real anymore. I had built a fortress of happiness around myself, and I truly believed that nothing from my old life could ever touch me again. I thought I had finally closed that chapter for good. But family isn't a chapter you can just close. It's a book you are tied to forever, whether you like it or not. And I was about to be reminded of that in the most painful way possible. 2 years into our happy, quiet life in Chicago, the past came roaring back with a single phone call. It was my father. My mother's cancer was back, and this time, it was stage 4. There were no options left. Without a second thought, I told my boss I was taking a leave of absence. Zachary held me as I cried, packed my bags with me, and promised to handle everything at home. He knew I had to go. I flew back to Boston not as the broken girl who had run away, but as the daughter my mother needed me to be, ready to face whatever came next. My return to my childhood home was a descent into a quiet, tense war. I took over my mother's care completely, managing her medications, talking to doctors, and just sitting with her, holding her hand for hours. Stephanie would sweep in for brief, dramatic visits, crying loudly by the bedside for 10 minutes before announcing she had an important lunch she couldn't miss. She expected me to fight with her, to scream about the past. But I refused to give her the drama she wanted. I was polite, distant, and focused only on our mother. My calm control drove her crazy. She didn't know how to fight someone who refused to pick up a weapon. One afternoon, when it was just me and Mom, she gripped my hand with what little strength she had left. Her voice was a bare whisper, but her eyes were clear. "Promise me," she said, each word an effort, "that you will find a way to have peace with your sister. Don't do it for her. Do it for you. Don't let all that anger be the thing you carry when I'm gone." I promised her I would, my tears falling onto our joined hands. I knew she wasn't asking me to forgive or forget. She was asking me to let go of the hate, to finally set myself free from the prison of my own bitterness. When she passed a week later, it was me holding her hand. It was me who sat with my devastated father through the night. And it was me who had to make the call. I dialed Stephanie's number, my voice sad but steady, and told her our mother was gone. The arrangements fell to me, and I handled every detail with a quiet strength I didn't know I possessed. Standing in the funeral home just before the mourners arrived, I thought about my mother's last wish. I wasn't there to start a fight or to get revenge. I was there to honor the woman who gave me life, and to close a chapter with the dignity she had always taught me to have. And if my new, happy life was revealed in the process, well, that was just a consequence Stephanie would have to learn to live with. Stephanie spat the word "alone" at me like it was poison, a final, cruel stone thrown to make me crumble in front of everyone. But instead of crying, I smiled. It was a small, quiet smile, but it was real, and it wiped the smug look right off her face. The confusion in her eyes was immensely satisfying. "Actually, Stephanie, I'm not," I said, my voice calm and clear in the hushed room. I looked past her, toward the doorway of the funeral home, my heart steady for the first time all day. "There's someone I'd like you to meet. Have you met my husband?" As if on cue, Zachary walked in, his eyes searching for me. When he saw me, he smiled that warm, genuine smile that had healed so many of my broken pieces. He came over and put a gentle hand on the small of my back, a simple, grounding touch. He nodded politely at my sister and the ghost of my past. "Stephanie, Nathan," I said, making the introduction. "This is my husband, Zachary Foster." The name hung in the air for a second, meaningless to my sister, but to Nathan, it was like a gunshot. His face went completely white, and he physically stumbled back a step, his eyes wide with a terror that had nothing to do with me. Stephanie stared at him, her brow furrowed in confusion. She couldn't understand why Nathan was looking at my husband like he had just seen a ghost. Then, a slow, dawning horror crept across her face as she looked from Nathan's panicked expression to Zachary's calm, kind one, and finally to my peaceful smile. The pieces clicked into place in her mind, and all the color drained from her face. Her perfect, stolen life was built on Nathan's success, and she had just realized she was standing in a house of cards, face to face with the man holding the match. "Zachary was just telling me how small the world can be," I said calmly, looking directly at Nathan. "Isn't that right?" He couldn't speak, just stammered, "You're Foster?" "From FCG," his voice cracking with disbelief. Stephanie turned to me, her voice a venomous whisper, all her fake grief gone, replaced by pure, ugly rage. "You did this on purpose," she hissed. I finally looked my sister in the eye, not as her victim, but as her equal. "No, Stephanie," I said, my voice soft but firm, letting the truth settle over the room. "I didn't do this. I just lived my life. This is just the result." I took Zachary's hand, his warmth a steady anchor in the storm I had just unleashed. I gave them one last look, my sister, shaking with rage, and the man who betrayed me, pale and broken. They weren't giants anymore. They were just two small, selfish people who had been caught in the web of their own lies. "It was lovely to see you both," I said, and then we turned and walked away. We didn't look back. We just left them there in the wreckage of the life they had stolen, their public humiliation a quiet, fitting end to a story they had started 6 years ago. Throughout the rest of the funeral, a quiet buzz filled the room. For the first time, the whispers weren't about me, the poor, lonely sister. They were about Stephanie and Nathan. People looked at them with a mixture of pity and disgust, their perfect couple image shattered in a matter of minutes. They had walked in expecting to be the stars of a sad play, but now they were just the villains in a story that everyone finally understood. They sat through the service in stone-cold silence, a huge, empty space between them where their lives used to be. The weight of everyone's judgment was a far heavier punishment than any words I could have said. After the service, as people were leaving, Stephanie cornered me by the doorway. Her face was pale and her hands were shaking, her earlier anger replaced by a wild, desperate panic. "You think you've won, don't you?" she spat, her voice trembling. "You planned this whole thing just to humiliate me." But looking at her, I didn't feel anger or triumph. I just felt a deep, profound sadness for the broken person standing in front of me. "Goodbye, Stephanie," I said softly, and walked away. Nathan quickly grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the exit, his face a grim mask of damage control as he steered his hysterical wife away from the watchful eyes of his old business contacts. My father came over and wrapped me in a hug, holding on so tightly I could barely breathe. When he pulled back, there were tears in his eyes. "Your mother," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "she would be so proud of the woman you've become." He turned and shook Zachary's hand, a look of immense gratitude on his face. One by one, aunts and cousins who had kept their distance for years came up to me, their hugs telling me that they finally saw the truth. They chose a side today, and it was mine. My family, the one that mattered, was finally whole again. Zachary and I didn't stay for the reception. There was nothing left for us there. We got in our car and started the long drive back to Chicago, back to our life. We didn't talk about what happened, we didn't need to. The battle was over. As the Boston skyline disappeared in the rearview mirror, I reached up and took off the simple pearl necklace my mother had given me years ago. I held it in my hand, feeling the cool, smooth beads against my skin. It was a piece of her, a piece of my past, but it wasn't heavy anymore. Driving away from that city, I felt the last of the 6-year-old weight lift from my shoulders. It was never about winning or losing, or about getting revenge. It was about being able to breathe again without the past choking me. It was about being free. Weeks after the funeral, I was back home in Chicago, sitting on the couch next to Zachary. The drama and the pain of Boston felt like a lifetime away, like a movie I had watched about someone else. In my hands, I held a small, black and white photo, a grainy picture of a tiny new life. After years of quiet struggle, we were finally going to have a baby. Looking at that photo, at the promise of a future I never thought I'd have, I finally understood what it meant to be truly rich. It had nothing to do with Nathan's money or Stephanie's stolen life. It was this. This quiet moment, this deep love, this new beginning. For years, I thought justice would be seeing them miserable. I fantasized about their downfall, about them feeling even a fraction of the pain they caused me. But my mother was right. True peace wasn't found in their failure, but in my own success. The real victory was in building a life so full of love and purpose that their memory, their betrayal, their very existence, became nothing more than a footnote in my story. They didn't have to fall for me to rise. I just had to decide to stand up and walk away from the ashes, and build my own kingdom from scratch. I learned the hardest and most valuable lesson of my life: you can't control the terrible things people do to you, but you have absolute control over your response. You can let a betrayal define you and turn you into a bitter, angry person, or you can let it refine you, burning away everything that wasn't real to reveal the strong person you were always meant to be. Dignity isn't something someone can take from you. It's something you have to build for yourself, brick by painful, beautiful brick, until you've created a fortress around your heart that no one can ever tear down again. My future is finally my own, and it is brighter than I ever could have imagined. I have a husband who loves me for who I am, a family that stands by me, and a baby on the way who will only ever know a life filled with love and honesty. The pain of the past will always be a part of my story, but it is no longer the whole story. It's just the dark chapter that came before the happy ending. If you have ever felt broken by someone else's choices, I hope you hear me. Your story isn't over. Your best chapter is still waiting to be written.